So I've already gotten the non-spoiler review of Wicked out of the way. So today we're just gonna sit down and chat with like some tea or coffee or whatever you've got. In my cup today is a blend of, I think, chamomile and lavender and sage, lemon balm. I don't remember what all is in it, but this is one of my favorite blends. And if you can't tell, I'm on the tail end of being sick right now, but I still wanted to go ahead and record this because it's been a while since I said that I was gonna put it out. So quick note, if you want to watch a video without spoilers, that would definitely be the last one. This video is going to have spoilers in it, huge spoilers, so you've been warned. Also, I'm just gonna warn you that I might kind of be all over the place today. This might be a bag of chaos, but we're gonna go ahead and talk about Wicked. This is a book that I rated, if you saw my last video, with 3.5 stars, which for me on my rating scale is honestly like a solid, I like this book. This had the potential to be a book that I really loved, but there were certain elements in it that just kind of made me uncomfortable, and so that kind of knocked it down to the 3.5 star. Speaking of the things that I absolutely hated about this book, so I mentioned in my last video there was adult content in the book, not spice as we would consider that today, and some people really enjoy spicy types of books. This was not a spicy type of book. All of the adult content in it was super uncomfortable. Like, can we talk about the philosophy club? What was happening in that scene? They were what? The tiger was what? Really just like the whole thing with any of like the pleasure faith stuff, yeah, really turned me off on the book. There were certain parts that I almost put it down and was like, I can't even do this anymore. And I don't mind having a little bit of spice in my books. I'm not someone who like seeks it out. I used to really like 50 Shades of Grey and stuff like that. And that's just not my style now. I don't go looking for it, but it's okay if there's like a scene or two in there. That totally doesn't bother me. But like, this was rough. But like I also mentioned in the last video, I do think it was kind of like meant for most of it to kind of make us feel uncomfortable. But then like, on the other hand, there were certain things that I'm like, another thing that was really, really hard for me, the whole storyline with Lear, who is her son, and at first she doesn't even remember or realize it, but by the time that she starts to, it's almost like it's too late for her to care. So we get to watch this woman who was rejected her entire life cause her son to be almost even more rejected than what she was. It was really hard to read. And that was like one of the things with Elphaba's character that I didn't necessarily love, is because like you could tell she did not want to look the reality in the face. Like she did not even want to think about the fact that like, wait, that makes sense. I actually am his mom. She just kind of refused. Just covering her eyes for the rest of her life. Another thing that was like really hard for me, in this scene where Elphaba and the wizard are talking and then he has Noor brought in and you see her as a slave girl who just seems utterly insane and not herself at all. That was really, really hard because you feel like you kind of really get to know Noor and you see her as a little girl. You see her grow a little bit in that age where she's just like starting to mature, which there was other stuff with that made me feel super uncomfortable too, but we're not going to go into all that. And then you see her again, and now I think it says that she's 16 when you see her as this slave girl, and that was just like one of those kind of gut punch, like sickening, are you kidding me type of moments. And I didn't hate that in the sense of like, oh, that shouldn't have been in there or anything like that. It's just one of those things that kind of like wrenches at your heart, you know? One thing that I want to comment on in this video that I don't think that I actually commented on in the last video, maybe I kind of did or just touched on it for a moment briefly, I don't know, but is the actual complexity of the characters. So I saw people complaining online about how sometimes the characters do things that you wouldn't necessarily expect for them to do or whatever, and it felt like, I don't think that they use the term like sloppy type of character work, but something along those lines. But I actually really felt like the characters had a good bit of complexity with them. I liked the fact that they didn't necessarily always do what you expected them to do in every single situation, because to me that's just people in general. And what they did wasn't like so out of character that it was like jarring or didn't make sense or whatever. So I actually kind of enjoyed that they didn't always do what you thought that they might. I actually really especially enjoyed it with the sisters, with Elphaba and Nessarose. Obviously, neither of them set out to become a witch, like whatsoever. That's not where they were headed in life. And yet it just kind of slowly happens over time until inch by inch by inch by inch, they just kind of get there. And if they look back from that point, it's like, how did this happen? But it's sort of like this slow shift toward, I guess, who they were always fated to be in a certain way. And of course, then you're always kind of also questioning how much of that has been influenced by the invisible actors like Yakel and that sort of thing too. And kind of thinking along those same lines, we also see people being used as pawns a lot. And I noticed especially young women, because when I started noticing it, I tried to think about like different scenarios where the people had been used as pawns. And normally it was with young women in this. So Dorothy with the shoes obviously is being used as a pawn, even by Glinda. Like she's moving her about as she feels that she must because of the shoes. Nor obviously is being used as a pawn as a slave girl to try to affect Elphaba in certain ways. And then of course, even before all of that, Elphaba and Glinda and Nessarose were all being used as pawns by Madame Morrible and being put into place as these adepts, and then thinking that they've escaped that fate and haven't actually become what they were supposed to. But you look back at the end and go, or were they? So actually that's something that I don't actually have written down, but I'm kind of thinking of right now too, is sort of like the inescapability of fate in this book anyways. I'm not saying that that's necessarily a real world principle and that like you can't escape your fate, but that is something definitely throughout the book. It's sort of like whatever has been prophesied is most definitely going to be that certain way, and there is no way to escape that whatsoever. Okay, so also something that I mentioned in the last video was the time jumps that other people on the internet didn't seem to like, and I said that it didn't really necessarily bother me, but that there was one specifically that I thought actually had a lot of purpose and that I would bring it up in this video. So I want to go ahead and do that now. I will also go ahead and add that maybe the time jump before the tornado felt slightly jarring to me, but that was the only one that even kind of slightly did. At first, it just felt kind of like we were missing something in between, like the stage wasn't quite like set up for her to be the Wicked Witch of the West. Like I was expecting, and I think that's why it felt jarring. I was expecting, okay, by the time that tornado comes, like she's gonna be wicked. And so the fact that like I was still tracking with Elphaba and I still understood Elphaba, I was like, wait, what? I thought she was supposed to be wicked by the time that Dorothy got there. And so for that reason, like at first it felt jarring when the tornado came. But I felt like the 7-year time jump was actually super purposeful. So after Fiero's death, we see her being a Mont, and Monts were like nuns, not necessarily because she has any sort of feelings about religion or anything like that, but just because they took her in. And that's where Yakel was, and that's who gave her her broom and kind of like set her on that path. So we see her then after Fiero's death being very, very different from the Elphaba that we have known thus far up until this point. Like something inside of her breaks. Not to cause her to be wicked, it almost like just completely takes all fire out of her and she is just utterly subdued. She is a shell of the former Elphaba. And so when she leaves from the Monterey and then ends up going to his old home in the mountains and living there with his family, then the time jump that happens from there I felt was actually very purposeful, because during that time she's getting herself back piece by piece, and we see that when she leaves the Monterey and when she gets to Kiamoko where she's been going, and kind of how she starts to slowly come back to life or have some sparks of interest coming back to her, and we start to see kind of the old Elphaba start to wake up in some sense, although it's not maybe necessarily the same old Elphaba. It's like when something absolutely awful and life-shattering happens to you and you kind of have to grow from where you are now with that new brokenness, and maybe some of it will get mended, but you will have learned lessons from whatever happened to you. There will be some sort of effect on your life from that point. And it felt like that's what that 7 years was probably full of. It was like that growth period for her and getting some semblance of that fire back. Of course, different and changed from what it might have been without Fiyera's death happening, but to get some semblance of Elphaba back. But people thought that it was like kind of strange to have that time jump there for nothing to happen for 7 years, and then she decides to go back and kill Morble. But she didn't just go back like suddenly one day on her own for no reason whatsoever. Like there was a trigger there that caused her to go back. And that was seeing Noor and hearing the wizard talk about how, he could do this to a person, but Madame Morrible did it with so much more finesse than what he ever could. And all of those girls at Shiz were being brainwashed and trained and changed by her, just like he had done to Noor, but just it looked better on the outside. Whew, that was the trigger that sent her to go back. It's not like, well, I've spent 7 years at Kiyomoko now, so I think that I'll go ahead and go back and do what I originally was going to do before Fiyero got killed. Like, that's not what happened, obviously. It was because she saw this awful sight and was like, it's my fault that there's still all of these people being brainwashed. But the sad thing, of course, then is that even when she goes to do the thing that she had originally needed to do with killing Madame Morrible, she's not able to actually do it because she already died. And then we see her not even be able to come to terms with the fact that she didn't do it. So she just starts telling people that she did it until she actually believes herself. Something that I also noticed in this book, like I said, we're just going to jump around to different things, but something that I also noticed in this book, first of all, I did not necessarily love everything about Melina, Elphaba's mother. By the end, you do kind of understand at least a little bit more about her, but still, as a mom, she just wasn't great. But throughout this book, did it feel to anyone else like we are watching Elphaba kind of become more and more like Melina? At first, it didn't kind of click, but then after several things had happened, I'm like, wait, you're being your mom. I didn't really put it all together until Frex actually said how much Elphaba looked like Melina. And then I kind of thought about it and I was like, well, that might not be the only resemblance. There was the infidelity and kind of like the lack of their own religious view. And of course, then in the biggest way, the lack of mothering. So how Melina was with Elphaba, she ended up being even worse towards Lear, just like not even willing to accept whatsoever that he was her son. Yeah. But also it was sort of like, even though Melina wasn't a great mom, Elphaba almost didn't really remember that, which actually reminds me of a different thing that I wanted to talk about, which is that there were several parts of this novel that made me think about memory and kind of the way that memories show up in our brains versus like the reality of a situation. So Elphaba remembers Melina as being warm, but I remember feeling kind of disgusted by how Melina was as a mom toward the beginning of the book. So even though she was often groggy, having different substances in her system just to kind of get by, absolutely hating her life, more interested in having intimate moments with random men than actually like spending time with her daughter, even though all of that was true of Melina, Elphaba's memories of her were mostly very warm. She remembers her as being like a warm type of mother. Another part that made me think about memories was that in the beginning, when we're watching Elphaba and she is looking into the glass that Turtle Heart makes for her, she's looking at it and her eyes are wide and she's saying horrors over and over and over again. And that was like her first word that she had ever said was horrors. But later she says that she would look into it and think that she saw the other land. And what they mean when they're talking about the other land is like basically what we would call heaven. So where those go who have gone before us. Now, of course, with this one, it's possible that she did look into it and see that at a different time and we just didn't see that actually happening and he meant that those were two separate occasions. But it just made me think, okay, wait, I thought that when she looked into it, she saw all these horrors that were happening. Okay, so another time when that stuck out to me, during her days at Shiz, she said that her father took her to the Quadlings to basically say, if the unnamed God can be merciful and love someone who looks like this, like my daughter, then he can love you too, which is very unfortunate in and of itself. But then when we actually see her memory through her eyes later, Frex took her there to ask forgiveness from the Quadlings because he felt personally responsible for what happened to Turtleheart. And he pointed at Elphaba and said, "Isn't this punishment enough?" So again, this is something where it could have been two separate incidents that we're hearing about, or maybe it's just that she prefers to remember it the first way, and then we're seeing in her memory what happens when she's not trying to kind of like put that wall up because she's taken something, and so it's caused this memory to kind of like come back up to the surface, and so it's like being forced there, and she's like never doing that again. So is it that she just suppresses that she doesn't want to think about that part and she would rather remember it the first way? I don't know, but it made me think for sure. And also the stuff with the adept meeting with Madame Morrible, it seems like everybody kind of like forgets bits and pieces, or they don't remember it exactly the same way, or they just kind of laugh it off like, oh my goodness, she had us so scared during those days. And so I wonder if there's anything with memory that we're supposed to be paying attention with there too. But anyways, those were just a few of my own personal ideas, things that made me stop and go, during which maybe that's not even something that he was trying to do throughout the book. I don't know, but those were all kind of moments for me. The most interesting part of the entire book, I think, for me was the character of Mother Yakel. And of course, I haven't read like the next two books in the series, and so I don't know in what capacity Yakel shows up in those. I know that I saw online that she's definitely brought up again in Son of a Witch, but I haven't read it. I don't think that I'm going to. But even just reading Wicked as a standalone, the entire idea of Mother Yakel is super intriguing for me. Okay. Like, part of me even wanted to reread the book just to see all of the different places where she popped up that like maybe I didn't even notice at first that it was actually talking about her. So I know obviously for a fact, because the book tells us, that she came with the dwarf with the time dragon. And the whole thing with the time dragon is in the chapter that talks about the birth of evil, and that's this question throughout the entire book, is like, what are the origins of evil? Where did it come from? What is it actually like? All of this stuff. So the chapter that's actually about like the birth of evil, that was when Mother Yakel came to Windhardings with the time dragon. And I know that it's sort of like we're being led to believe that like Elphaba's birth is the origin of evil, like she has somehow brought this evil upon the land of Oz. But I don't know, it kind of feels to me at least like Mother Yakel represents evil, like the thread of evil running throughout all of the stories that we hear. She was there with the time dragon. She was at the Monterey when Elphaba was there as one of the Monts. She's the one who actually gave Elphaba her broom and kind of like set her toward this journey of becoming who she was going to become as the Wicked Witch of the West. She was in the Grimmery, which is from the land where the wizard was from, so not even from Oz at all. She was the one who gave Nanny the pills before Nessarose was born that probably caused her to be born without any arms. And she was the hag at the Philosophy Club, which, again, ew. So when Elphaba is having like the whole conversation with the dwarf where he's talking about Yakel, that entire conversation was exclamation points for me. Like, it's one of those moments where a story has set up all these different points in your mind, and then suddenly the time comes when they all just sort of like link up and you get the big picture of the story. That's what that conversation was. The fact that Elphaba's father is the wizard, this person that we've seen kind of moving pawns all over the board this entire time, which he does to a certain degree. Of course, there are other people that move pawns probably more efficiently and maybe without even being seen as much as what he does. But the fact that that's her father and that's why she's so different is because she's actually from two different worlds, from our world where the wizard came from, and then also from Oz. It's just insane. And of course, then that whole thing kind of sends her spiraling. This is already after the whole thing with Madame Morrible. Obviously, she wanted to be able to go and to kill her, to do the thing that she had left undone from the before, and that was just completely ruined because she had literally just died before she got there. So it's like even when she tries to go and do the wicked thing, then somehow she stopped from being able to do it. So it was right on the tail end of that. And then going to the dinner party at Averick's house, which was strange in and of itself, confessing to what you've done, not really having anybody seem to care all that much other than maybe Averick's wife, the Margravess, and then having that conversation with the dwarf at the Time Dragon, kind of where all of it started and being brought back full circle to this moment, and learning who your father is. Just utterly mind-blowing. And to see how it affects her afterward, that she is like completely beside herself when visiting Bach's family. Like that is such a huge like turning point for her. People who obviously were not afraid of her before. Bach has known her for forever, but to see them for once actually being afraid of her. Obviously there has been some sort of shift. Something has happened with learning all the information that she just learned to kind of make some sort of snap occur. I still wouldn't say that she is wicked like they all say that she is, but there's obviously some sort of difference that makes her utterly terrifying. So reading that part after having this whole book with Elphaba and seeing who she is as a person, like reading that part was really, really hard. And just knowing that like he didn't understand why she was acting the way that she was, and it was automatically like protective mode, fear mode for his family. Even somebody who used to understand you now suddenly does not, because things have changed so much for you. We also see right after that just how much hope has actually been lost for her, because throughout the entire book, one of the big things about her character is sort of like this civil rights sort of activist and wanting all sentient beings to be treated fairly. And so when she meets an animal with a capital A, so not like animals that we think of, but those who are more humanoid, when she meets an animal who is being treated poorly and doesn't actually do anything to change it, like that's a huge shift in character that also is supposed to signal to us like something is not right here. A huge change has happened here. So I think that with the animal happens pretty much right after Bach's house. It's been a couple weeks now since I finished it, so I can't remember fully, but it happens just shortly right after the incidents at Bach's house. And that's really hard because then it's like you're letting go of, I don't want to say the last piece of hope, because that hasn't quite happened yet, but a big chunk of hope. She had always been one who kind of wanted to change how things were done, to change how animals were being seen, really to try to slam on the brakes before any negative change in their position in society even happened back when she was in school. So to see her see injustice and not step in to help, and her words, I wish I could remember. Oh, actually, I wrote it down. Page 378. But the witch could not stop to intervene. So far, she'd been unable to save Nor. She'd been incompetent at bargaining with the wizard. She had been a moment too late to murder Madame Morrible. Or had she been just in time? Either way, she should not try what was clearly beyond her. Up until this point, she never thought about it being beyond her to be able to jump in with a cause and assist someone. And she actually fought against that idea previously in the book. And so to see her now adopt that as her own, and just how fragmented her mind is becoming, even basically being able to convince herself, not basically, she is able to convince herself that she did kill Madame Morrible. It's so important for her that she actually did the thing that she set out to do, that she can't even admit to herself that she didn't do it. And then, of course, we still have that one little last bit of hope. She was hoping that Fiyero was the Scarecrow. She wasn't able to place him like she was the rest of them. Obviously, she knew that Dorothy had come from another land. Everybody knew what happened with the tornado. She thought that she knew about the lion because she thought that that was probably the cub that they had rescued when they were back at Shiz. She hears about the Tin Man story later on and exactly who he is. But the Scarecrow, she's unable to actually place. And honestly, she even had me wondering too if there was any sort of possibility that that scarecrow might have somehow been Fiyero. And also, spoiler alert for the musical, my husband says that in the musical, it actually is Fiyero. So they take that idea and they decide to put the positive spin on it and that it actually is. But unfortunately, in the book, it is not Fiyero. We see him fall down and all of the straw just kind of dissipate, and it was not him. And when Elphaba sees that, it is basically the last bit of hope that she had utterly gone. And from that point, the only other thing that she actually even wants is her sister's shoes. And we know that she does not get those back either. And so you just kind of watch her story go from, okay, this has been sad her whole life, and yet there's like this strength about her. Like there's just something about her. She's able to hold it all together. She is still like this actually truly good person until that moment when all those dots are connected, and then you just see it kind of devolve and implode from there. Okay, and then eventually when we do get to that whole part with Dorothy, Elphaba is going through it. She is trying to come up with any possible reason or explanation for why in the world Dorothy might be there. She is just grasping at straws, for lack of a better phrase. We see kind of all those different connections and conspiracy theories just popping back up as she's trying to figure out what in the world Dorothy is doing there. And then we get kind of this like twist of forgiveness. So as I mentioned in the last video, forgiveness is kind of like a theme throughout the whole book. When Elphaba's a young girl, her father wants forgiveness from the Quadlings and does not receive it, so far as we see anyways. When Elphaba is older and an adult, she is seeking forgiveness from Fiyero's wife. And then we get to page 402 with Dorothy, and we have this twist. Elphaba and Dorothy are currently arguing. I think up on the roof is where this is happening, and Elphaba has just accused her of coming there to kill her. "I couldn't kill you," said the girl, weeping. "I was horror-struck to have killed your sister. How could I kill you too?" "Very charming," said the witch. "Very nice, very touching. Then why did you come here?" "Yes, the wizard said to murder you," Dorothy said, "but I never intended to, and that's not why I came." The witch held the burning broom even higher, closer, to look in the girl's face. When they said that it was your sister, and that we had to come here, it was like a prison sentence, and I never wanted to. But I thought, well, I would come, and my friends would come with me to help, and I would come, and I would say—" "Say what?" cried the witch on the edge. "I would say," said the girl, straightening up, gritting her teeth, "I would say to you, would you ever forgive me for that accident, for the death of your sister? Would you ever, ever forgive me, for I could never forgive myself?" The witch shrieked in panic and disbelief that even now the world should twist so, offending her once again. Elphaba, who had endured Serima's refusal to forgive, now begged by a gibbering child for the same mercy always denied her. How could you give such a thing out of your own hollowness? So the whole thing that Dorothy wanted by coming there was to be forgiven by Elphaba. And without reading the whole book, I feel like you can't really get the full effect, like just from me reading that little bit to you. But that moment was just like, just so good, like that you just like felt it down deep in your soul after reading through all of it and kind of grappling with all of the unforgiveness that Elphaba had to deal with throughout her life. And then the purity of Dorothy and her coming out and asking for this forgiveness, and Elphaba being so taken aback by it, but that bitterness that had already kind of settled over her heart was there. It was a really good book, guys. All right, but like I said, overall, I had given this book 3.5 stars. I would love to hear y'all's thoughts about this book if you've read it down in the comments, or any other little things that you've noticed or things that it made you think about. I just love hearing other people's perspectives on the literature that they're reading or that I have read as well. So I would like to get your input on it. But that's it for today. Bye.